Thomas Reed had chosen isolation for its simplicity. 3 years on Henderson Island had taught him that simplicity rarely meant easy, but it did mean predictable. Every morning, he would wake before dawn, check his solar panels and water collection systems, and then spend hours observing the remarkable marine life in the crystal-clear waters of the South Pacific. His research on coral reef rehabilitation had been making steady progress, and the solitude suited him. After losing his wife to cancer 5 years ago, predictability was all he wanted. That predictability shattered on a muggy Tuesday evening in March. The first sign was a deep thrumming that vibrated through his chest, different from any aircraft he'd ever heard. Thomas stepped out of his modest cabin, squinting at the twilight sky. A streak of blue-white light cut across the darkening heavens, trailing what looked like sparks of purple electricity. "That's not a meteor," he muttered, grabbing his binoculars. The object was moving too slowly, its descent too controlled. As it approached the island's northern side, the light dimmed enough for him to make out a distinct shape, sleek, curved, and definitely not of human design. The crash, when it came, was surprisingly gentle. A muffled thump followed by the sound of shifting sand. Thomas grabbed his emergency medical kit, a flashlight, and his satellite phone, though he doubted the latter would be of any use for this particular emergency. He'd made the 20-minute hike to the northern beach hundreds of times, but never at this pace, never with his heart hammering so hard against his ribs. The vessel had dug a shallow trench in the beach, its pearlescent surface reflecting the last rays of sunlight. It was roughly the size of a small yacht, but its design defied terrestrial engineering. No visible seams or rivets, just flowing curves that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways. A faint humming emanated from within, punctuated by what sounded distressingly like whimpers of pain. "Hello?" Thomas called out, immediately feeling foolish. If there was someone, something, inside, they probably wouldn't understand English. He approached cautiously, medical kit held in front of him like a shield. A section of the hull suddenly became transparent, revealing a dimly lit interior. The whimpering grew louder, and Thomas saw movement inside. Something was huddled in what appeared to be a pilot's seat, but it wasn't until he got closer that he could make out details. The alien was humanoid, but clearly not human. Its skin had a faint bluish tinge, and what looked like fine, iridescent scales covered its exposed arms. Long, silver-white hair fell in intricate braids around a face that was both beautiful and utterly foreign, large, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to shift color like opals, and delicate gill-like structures along its neck that fluttered with each labored breath. But what caught Thomas's attention most was its swollen abdomen. The alien was pregnant, very pregnant, and clearly in distress. "Oh boy," Thomas whispered. This is way above my pay grade." The transparent section of hull suddenly disappeared, leaving a wide opening. The alien looked directly at him, pressing one hand against her abdomen while the other reached out toward him. Her lips moved, speaking words in a language that sounded like flowing water and chiming bells. Thomas didn't need to understand the words to recognize a plea for help. He'd heard that same tone from injured researchers he'd treated over the years, that universal sound of someone in pain reaching out to another living being for aid. He stepped forward, holding up his empty hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm Thomas," he said softly, pointing to himself. "I want to help." The alien's color-shifting eyes studied him for a long moment. Then, with obvious effort, she nodded, a surprisingly human gesture that made Thomas wonder just how much their species might have in common. She spoke again, this time placing both hands on her swollen belly and making a motion that unmistakably mimicked contractions. Thomas felt a bead of sweat roll down his back, and it wasn't from the evening heat. "You're in labor," he said, more to himself than to her. "An alien is about to give birth on my island, and I'm the only one here to help." He ran a hand through his graying hair, trying to fight down the panic rising in his chest. Okay. First things first, we need to get you somewhere more comfortable than this crash site." The alien seemed to understand his intent, if not his words. She attempted to stand but stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her. Thomas rushed forward instinctively to catch her, surprised by how light she felt despite her pregnant state. Her skin was cool to the touch, and he could feel a slight vibration, almost like a purr, emanating from her chest. She said something else, this time in a tone that managed to convey both gratitude and worry. Thomas noticed that her spacecraft was beginning to emit a high-pitched whine, and sections of the hull were starting to fade in and out of visibility. "That doesn't sound good," he said. "We need to move. My cabin's about 20 minutes away, but we'll take it slow." The alien gripped his arm tightly as another contraction visibly rippled across her abdomen. Her opalescent eyes met his, and in that moment, Thomas felt the weight of what was happening truly settle on his shoulders. Here he was, possibly the first human to ever make contact with an alien species, and instead of scientists and diplomats, all this woman had was a lonely marine biologist on a remote island. "Don't worry," he said, trying to put as much reassurance into his voice as possible. "I'm going to help you through this. Both of you." He glanced at her belly. "Though I really hope your species gives birth in a way that's at least somewhat similar to humans." As they began their slow journey toward his cabin, the alien vessel behind them gave one final whine before shimmering out of existence entirely. Thomas tried not to think about what that meant for his unexpected guest's future. Right now, he had to focus on the present, on keeping her safe and comfortable until her child decided to make its appearance. The sun had fully set now, and the stars were beginning to appear above them. Thomas switched on his flashlight, illuminating the path ahead. The alien's breathing was becoming more labored, and her steps more uncertain. He could feel her trembling against him, though whether from fear, pain, or both, he couldn't tell. "One step at a time," he murmured, adjusting his grip to better support her weight. "We'll figure this out together." Above them, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, bearing witness to this unprecedented moment of interspecies cooperation. Thomas couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. He'd come to this island seeking predictability, seeking simplicity. Instead, he'd found himself playing midwife to an alien mother on a beach in the middle of nowhere. Life, it seemed, had other plans for his quiet existence. The walk to Thomas's cabin had taken nearly 40 minutes, twice as long as usual. By the time they arrived, the alien was leaning heavily against him, her breathing shallow and rapid. The cool night air seemed to help her somewhat, but each contraction brought a fresh wave of distress that manifested in subtle pulses of bioluminescence across her scaled skin. Inside the cabin, Thomas quickly cleared his bed, grateful that he'd changed the sheets that morning. "Here," he said, gesturing to the bed. "You should rest." He demonstrated by pretending to lie down, and the alien nodded in understanding. As she settled onto the bed, Thomas took the opportunity to properly examine her condition. Her abdomen was firm and distended, with faint patterns of light pulsing beneath her skin in what he assumed was the equivalent of contractions. The gill-like structures on her neck fluttered rapidly, and her opalescent eyes had taken on a darker, stormier hue. "Water," she suddenly said, the word heavily accented but unmistakably English. Thomas nearly dropped the medical kit he was holding. You can speak English?" The alien made a gesture that seemed both affirmative and frustrated. "Learning, from you. Words. Slow. Water, please." "Of course, yes, right away." Thomas hurried to fetch water, his mind racing. She was learning English just by listening to him speak. The implications were staggering, but he forced himself to focus on the immediate situation. When he returned with the water, she took the glass in trembling hands. Instead of drinking it, she poured a small amount over the gill structures on her neck. The effect was immediate, her breathing eased, and some of the tension left her face. "Thank you," she said, her pronunciation already clearer. "I am Vetha. My kind, we learn quickly. But speaking is harder." "I'm amazed you can speak at all," Thomas said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. I have so many questions, but they can wait. Right now, I need to know about your pregnancy. How can I help? Vaitha placed both hands on her abdomen. Our births, similar to humans. But we need water. Much water. She gestured to her gills. Not for breathing only. For birth. Thomas nodded, thinking quickly. I have a large shower stall in the bathroom. Would that help? Or I could fill the bathtub. Shower better. Moving water. She grimaced as another contraction hit, the lights under her skin pulsing more intensely. Soon. Very soon. Thomas spent the next hour preparing everything he could think of: clean towels, his medical kit, extra lighting, and a small electric heater in case the water made things too cold. He helped Vaitha to the bathroom when she indicated she was ready, and she immediately seemed more comfortable once under the shower spray. As he watched her gill structures expand and contract under the water, Thomas noticed something extraordinary. The water running off her body seemed to absorb the bioluminescent pulses from her skin, creating streams of glowing liquid that spiraled down the drain. The sight was beautiful and alien and terrifying all at once. Vaitha, he said gently, I need to know what to expect. What should I look for? How can I tell if something's wrong? She turned those remarkable eyes toward him, and for a moment, he felt like he could see centuries of evolutionary divergence between their species, and yet also the fundamental similarities that united all living things. Colors, she said, her voice stronger now. Watch the lights. Blue good. Purple better. Red. She shuddered. Red bad. Very bad. Thomas watched the shifting patterns of light beneath her skin. Currently, they were a soft, pulsing blue. And the baby? Will it be able to breathe air right away, or will it need water? Both. Like me. But water first. She reached out suddenly and gripped his hand. Her skin was cool and slightly textured, like fine silk over smooth scales. Thomas, thank you. Could have died. Ship, broken. Found you instead. The simple sincerity in her voice made his throat tight. You're welcome. Though I still have no idea if I'm qualified to help deliver an alien baby. A small sound escaped her that might have been a laugh. No one qualified. First time. You're kind, my kind. Her expression became serious. Making history. Scared? Terrified, Thomas admitted with a weak smile. But I've learned that sometimes the scariest moments can also be the most important. Vaitha nodded, then suddenly tensed as another contraction hit. This one was different, the bioluminescent patterns shifted to a deeper blue with hints of purple, and her entire body seemed to vibrate with its intensity. Thomas, she gasped, coming now. Stay. Help. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not going anywhere. We'll do this together. Over the next few hours, Thomas learned more about alien physiology than he ever could have imagined. The bioluminescent patterns became a crucial guide, telling him when contractions were approaching and how intense they would be. He discovered that Vaitha's people had a sort of biological sonar. During particularly strong contractions, she would emit high-pitched sounds that created ripples in the shower water, the patterns somehow helping her coordinate her breathing and pushing. The most fascinating discovery was how the water itself seemed to interact with her biology. The glowing streams that ran off her body began to move against gravity, forming complex floating patterns in the air around her. Thomas would have thought he was hallucinating if he hadn't been maintaining such careful focus on every detail of the process. As dawn approached, the contractions reached their peak. The bathroom was filled with floating droplets of luminescent water, each one pulsing with a deep purple light that cast otherworldly shadows on the walls. Vaitha's voice had gone beyond words, back to the chiming, bell-like sounds of her native language. Thomas found himself speaking constantly, offering encouragement and support even though he wasn't sure she could still understand English. He monitored her vital signs as best he could with his limited medical knowledge, watching for any hint of the dreaded red in her bioluminescent patterns. The sun was just beginning to peek through the bathroom window when everything changed. The floating water droplets suddenly froze in place, then began spinning in concentric circles around Vaitha. Her eyes, which had been squeezed shut, flew open, and Thomas gasped. They were glowing with the same deep purple light as the water. Almost, she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Ready?" Thomas took a deep breath and nodded, knowing that whatever happened next would be unlike anything in human experience. "Ready." The change in atmospheric pressure was what first caught Thomas's attention. Even inside the bathroom, he could feel it, that distinctive heaviness in the air that preceded a major storm. Through the small window, he could see dark clouds gathering with unnatural speed. "Something's wrong," he muttered, glancing between the window and Vaitha. The alien mother's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to a deeper purple, almost indigo, and the floating water droplets around her were spinning faster. "Not wrong," Vaitha managed between breaths. "Normal. Birth, effects, weather." Her words were becoming more labored, both from the increasing contractions and what seemed to be a weakening grasp on English. "Energy, builds. Make storm." Thomas's scientific mind raced to understand. "The energy from your biological processes is somehow influencing the atmospheric conditions?" A crack of thunder answered his question, making the cabin's windows rattle. "Need, cave," Vaitha suddenly said, her opalescent eyes wide with concern. "Not safe here. Too much power." As if to emphasize her point, a bolt of lightning split the sky outside, closer this time. The purple light emanating from her skin pulsed in sync with the thunder. Thomas knew of several caves on the island, he'd mapped them all during his first year here. The nearest one was about half a mile away, high enough to be safe from flooding but not so high as to be dangerous to reach. But moving Vaitha in her condition. Another lightning strike, even closer. The cabin's lights flickered ominously. "Storm building," Vaitha gasped. "When baby comes, bigger. Much bigger." She grabbed his arm, her cool fingers trembling. "Please. Trust me." Thomas did some quick calculations. The cave he had in mind was dry and spacious enough. He had emergency supplies stashed there, including basic medical equipment. And if Vaitha was right about the storm's connection to the birth. "Okay," he said, already moving to gather essential supplies. "But we need to hurry. Can you walk?" Vaitha nodded, though her expression suggested it wouldn't be easy. The floating water droplets collapsed back into normal water as she struggled to her feet, but the bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin continued to pulse with increasing intensity. Thomas quickly packed a waterproof bag with medical supplies, towels, his emergency radio, and some bottled water. The wind was picking up outside, and he could hear the palm trees beginning to bend and creak. This was going to be close. They made their way out of the cabin just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The sky had turned an impossible shade of purple-black, shot through with threads of bioluminescence that matched the patterns on Vaitha's skin. Thomas had never seen anything like it. It was as if the alien birth was somehow connecting with Earth's atmosphere on a fundamental level. "The cave is this way," Thomas said, supporting Vaitha as they began their careful journey. "Just take it slow and steady." The trek that should have taken 15 minutes stretched into nearly 45. Every few minutes, Vaitha would have to stop as contractions hit her, each one accompanied by spectacular displays of lightning that forked between the clouds in patterns that defied natural weather behavior. The rain fell in sheets, but strangely, it seemed to curve around them, as if Vaitha's energy field was creating some sort of protective bubble. Thomas noticed that wherever the rain touched Vaitha's skin, it began to glow with the same purple light that pulsed beneath her scales. The effect spread across the ground around their feet, creating luminescent footprints that lingered for several seconds before fading. They were about halfway to the cave when Vaitha suddenly staggered, nearly falling. "Thomas," she said, her voice strained, "something different." "Baby," responding to planet. "What do you mean?" Thomas had to shout over the wind and thunder. "Our worlds, different gravity. Different energy." She pressed one hand against her swollen abdomen, and Thomas could see the light patterns swirling faster. Baby adapting. Becoming, part Earth, part home. The implications of what she was saying staggered Thomas. The child wasn't just being born on Earth, it was being influenced by Earth's fundamental forces, adapting to them even before taking its first breath. This wasn't just first contact anymore, this was evolution happening in real time. A massive lightning bolt struck a tree about 50 yards away, splitting it in half with an explosive crack. The thunder that followed was deafening, and Thomas could feel the ground vibrate beneath his feet. "Almost there," he encouraged, pointing to the dark opening of the cave ahead. "Just a little further." The last 100 yards were the hardest. The wind had reached hurricane force, driving the rain sideways. Only the strange protective field around Vaitha kept them from being blown off their feet. The bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin were now so bright that they lit the path ahead of them, creating shifting shadows that danced across the rocky ground. Finally, they reached the cave entrance. Thomas helped Vaitha inside, grateful for the solid rock walls around them. The cave was about 30 feet deep and 15 feet wide, with a ceiling high enough to stand comfortably. Most importantly, it was dry and stable. "Here," Thomas said, quickly setting up an area with emergency blankets and supplies. "This is better. We're safe here." Vaitha sank down onto the blankets, her breathing labored. Outside, the storm continued to intensify, but the sound was muffled by the thick rock walls. The cave was illuminated entirely by the light from Vaitha's skin now, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that seemed fitting for what was about to happen. "Thomas," Vaitha said, her voice stronger now that they were settled. "Thank you. But hardest part, coming now." She looked at him with those remarkable color-shifting eyes. "Storm outside, nothing compared to what happens in here." As if in response to her words, the bioluminescent patterns across her skin began to pulse with a new rhythm, and Thomas could feel a subtle vibration in the air around them. The cave itself seemed to hum with energy, and small stones on the floor started to tremble. "What do you need me to do?" Thomas asked, pushing aside his scientific curiosity and focusing on the immediate situation. Vaitha reached out and took his hand, her skin now almost hot to the touch. "Stay. Watch. Learn." A small smile crossed her alien features. "Help make history." Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, but inside the cave, time seemed to slow down. Thomas knew that whatever was about to happen would change not just his life, but potentially the course of human history. He squeezed Vaitha's hand gently, silently promising to see this through to the end, whatever that might be. The cave had become a chamber of living light. Vaitha's bioluminescence had spread beyond her body, creating intricate patterns that crawled across the cave walls like luminous vines. The air itself seemed to shimmer with particles of purple light, and Thomas could feel a gentle vibration humming through his bones. "The baby," Vaitha said, her voice tight with concentration, "comes soon. But first, must prepare." She placed both hands on her abdomen, which was now glowing so brightly that Thomas had to squint to look directly at it. "In our world, birth connects to everything. Here, must adapt." Thomas watched in amazement as droplets of water began to condense out of the air, floating upward instead of falling. Each drop caught the light from Vaitha's skin and magnified it, creating a dome of hovering lights above them. The effect was both beautiful and slightly terrifying. Temperature dropping, Thomas noted, checking his medical equipment. The cave had grown significantly cooler, and he could see his breath misting in the purple-tinged air. "Is that normal?" Vaitha nodded, then grimaced as another contraction hit. The floating water droplets pulsed in sync with her pain. Energy needs cold. Heat disrupts the field. She grabbed Thomas's hand suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. When it happens, don't be afraid. Look, strange to human eyes. Before Thomas could ask what she meant, the cave was plunged into total darkness. Even Vaitha's bioluminescence had vanished. The only sound was the muffled storm outside and their breathing. Then, slowly, new lights began to appear. They started as tiny points, like stars appearing at dusk, but these stars moved with purpose. They swirled around Vaitha in complex orbital patterns, each one trailing threads of light that wove together into a cocoon of energy. The membrane forms, Vaitha whispered, her voice carrying a musical quality Thomas hadn't heard before. Like home, but different. Earth's gravity changes everything. The light cocoon around her grew more intense, and Thomas began to see something extraordinary. Where the light threads crossed, they created tiny windows into somewhere else. Through these gaps, he caught glimpses of an alien world, purple skies, crystalline structures, and bodies of water that flowed upward. Your homeworld? He asked in awe. Yes. Baby needs both worlds. Both energies. Vaitha's voice was strained now, and the glimpses of her world began to flicker and shift. Thomas, need you now. Hand, here. She guided his hand to a specific point on her abdomen, just below the brightest concentration of lights. The moment his hand made contact, Thomas felt a jolt of something. Not electricity exactly, but a form of energy that made his hair stand on end and sent tingles through his entire body. He tried to pull away, but Vaitha held his hand firmly in place. Connect, she said. Bridge, between worlds. Your gravity, your energy, helps guide. Thomas suddenly understood. His presence wasn't just as a midwife or observer, he was actively participating in the process, helping to stabilize the interaction between Earth's natural forces and the alien energies Vaitha was channeling. The next hour passed in a blur of light and sensation. The cocoon of energy grew more complex, with layers of light shifting and sliding over each other like aurora borealis gone three-dimensional. The glimpses of the alien world became more frequent, and Thomas could feel subtle changes in gravity as the two realities briefly touched. Vaitha's contractions intensified, each one causing ripples in the energy field that made the cave walls themselves seem to flex and bend. The floating water droplets had formed into distinct rings that spun at different speeds, creating a hypnotic dance of light and motion. Close, Vaitha gasped, her eyes now glowing so brightly that they looked like miniature suns. Thomas, ready. When it comes, catch in water. The droplets of floating water suddenly coalesced into a sphere about the size of a beach ball, hovering just where a human doctor would position themselves for delivery. Thomas moved into position, trying to ignore the way gravity seemed to hiccup and skip around him. What happened next defied everything he knew about physics and biology. The energy cocoon around Vaitha began to pulse rapidly, the glimpses of her homeworld becoming a strobing kaleidoscope of alien vistas. The sphere of water started to glow from within, and Thomas could feel an intense pressure building in the air. Vaitha let out a cry that sounded like crystal bells shattering, and the energy field exploded outward. Thomas instinctively closed his eyes against the blinding flash, but kept his hand steady on the water sphere. He felt something slide into the water, accompanied by a sensation like static electricity and a sound like distant wind chimes. When he opened his eyes, he found himself holding a sphere of glowing water containing what appeared to be a perfect fusion of human and alien characteristics. The baby was small, about the size of a human newborn, with skin that shifted between normal human tones and the scaled iridescence of its mother. Tiny gill structures fluttered as it took its first breaths of both air and water, and its eyes, when they opened, held the same opalescent quality as Vaitha's but with flecks of earthly blue and green. Perfect, Vaitha breathed, her own light dimming to a soft glow. Perfect bridge, between worlds. The baby made a sound that was somewhere between a human cry and the chiming language of its mother, and the remaining energy in the cave seemed to respond, creating a gentle light show that danced across the walls. Thomas carefully handed the baby, still suspended in its sphere of glowing water, to Vaitha. The moment the sphere touched her skin, it merged with her natural bioluminescence, creating a protective layer that would help the newborn adjust to its dual nature. "A girl," Vaitha said softly, cradling her child. "First of her kind. Earth and stars, together." She looked up at Thomas, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, for helping bring new life. New hope." As Thomas watched mother and child bond, he realized he had just participated in something that went beyond first contact or even scientific discovery. This was the beginning of something entirely new, a bridge between two worlds, embodied in a tiny being who would carry both Earth and the distant stars in her very cells. Outside, the storm had begun to calm, as if nature itself was settling down to welcome its newest child. The cave was filled with a peaceful glow, the merged light of mother and daughter creating patterns that seemed to tell stories of both worlds on the ancient walls. 2 weeks had passed since the extraordinary night in the cave. Thomas sat on his cabin's porch, watching Vaitha and her daughter, whom she had named Aurelia, a name that bridged their cultures, meaning golden in Earth's Latin but containing sounds that resonated with her own language's word for starbirth. The baby was developing at an astonishing rate, already showing awareness and responsiveness far beyond what would be normal for a human infant. Her dual nature had stabilized into something remarkable. She could breathe both air and water, and her skin would shift between human and alien characteristics depending on her environment and needs. "She dreams of both worlds," Vaitha said, approaching Thomas with Aurelia cradled in her arms. Her English had improved dramatically, though her voice still carried that musical quality that marked her as not quite human. "Last night, her lights showed me pictures of Earth's oceans and our crystal cities." Thomas smiled, watching the baby's skin shimmer with soft patterns of bioluminescence. "Have you decided what you're going to do? About contact?" It was a question they'd been dancing around for days. Vaitha's ship had completely disappeared after their arrival, but she had explained that it wasn't destroyed, rather, it had entered a kind of dimensional pocket, waiting to be recalled when she was ready. The decision about when and how to reveal herself to the wider human world was weighing heavily on her. "I think," she said slowly, "it is time. Aurelia needs both worlds, not just glimpses in dreams. And our peoples." She paused, looking out over the ocean. "We have watched Earth for so long, waiting for the right moment. Perhaps the universe chose this way, not through grand diplomatic meetings, but through life itself." Thomas nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "I'll help however I can. Though I suspect my quiet days of coral research are about to become much less quiet." Vaitha made that chiming sound that he now recognized as laughter. "You underestimate your role, Thomas. You will be remembered as the one who bridged our worlds, who helped bring forth the first child of 2 stars." As if in response to her mother's words, Aurelia stirred and opened her remarkable eyes. In the sunlight, they were more dramatic than ever, swirling patterns of opal and earth blue that seemed to contain entire galaxies. She reached out one tiny hand toward Thomas, and where her skin caught the sun, it created rainbow refractions like light through crystal. "She recognizes you," Vaitha said softly. "Your energy helped shape her. In our culture, that makes you as much her parent as I am." Before Thomas could respond to this overwhelming statement, a new sound caught their attention, the distant whir of helicopter blades. It seemed their decision about contact was about to be accelerated. "Military," Thomas said, recognizing the sound pattern. "Probably investigating the electromagnetic anomalies from the birth." The storm was pretty hard to miss. But Vaitha didn't appear concerned. Instead, she smiled and held Aurelia up to the sky. The baby's skin began to glow with increasing intensity, and suddenly, the air above them shimmered. Thomas gasped as Vaitha's ship materialized, hovering silently above his cabin. It looked different now, more organic, its pearlescent surface rippling with the same bioluminescent patterns that marked its occupants. Perfect timing, Vaitha said. Aurelia sensed them coming. She's already learning to bridge our technologies. She turned to Thomas. Ready to help me explain to your people why a marine biologist on a remote island has become part of the first human-alien family? The helicopter was visible now, and Thomas could see other aircraft approaching in the distance. He thought about how his life had changed in just 2 weeks, from a man who sought solitude to someone about to become a central figure in humanity's first open contact with alien life. But looking at Aurelia, seeing how she embodied the best of both worlds, he knew it was worth whatever chaos was about to ensue. This child represented something profound, proof that the gulf between stars could be bridged not just by technology or diplomacy, but by the most fundamental force in any universe, life itself. Ready, he said, standing up straighter as the helicopter approached. Though I think we should lead with showing them how she glows in the dark. That usually breaks the ice. Vaitha laughed that crystalline laugh again, and Aurelia joined in with a sound that was somehow both human baby and alien music. Above them, the ship pulsed with welcoming lights, and around them, the ocean reflected the morning sun like scattered diamonds. As the helicopter landed and uniformed figures began approaching with a mix of caution and wonder, Thomas felt a profound sense of peace. His quiet life studying coral reefs had led him to this moment, helping to nurture a new kind of life that would forever change 2 worlds. Aurelia reached for his hand again, and where their skin touched, a soft glow emanated, Earth and stars, connected at last. The dawn of a new era was breaking, and it had begun not with war or fear, but with the simple, powerful act of one human choosing to help another being bring new life into the universe. Welcome to Earth, Thomas said to the approaching officers, standing proudly beside Vaitha and Aurelia. We have quite a story to tell you.